Today, let's begin with this short reflection titled Framework of Reference. It starts like this. There is an idea that knowledge and or wisdom can be simplified into particular cognitive building blocks put together to form or reform a machine-like organ. In other words, the brain or mind or the human being itself. Then through this machine-like thing comes output, and that the quality or quantity of this output is what determines the value, in other words, success, effectiveness, goodness, etc., of the person or the machine. Hence, when we view elements such as education, work, or even something more simple or fundamental like habits, they are likely to be considered as cognitive building blocks or a means of putting those blocks together. The image then of a good person or a good life is a kind of amalgamation that can be simplified or demystified in a way. I remember this reflection, this essay, because of the title. So I've been reflecting on the notion of what knowledge is and how the different things that we're exposed to as data or information becomes something else, becomes what we would consider as knowledge. What's the point, or what's that bridge that we go through in order to say that something is not just some random arbitrary piece of information but is something that we know? When can we say that we truly know something? And there's this notion that a lot of it is grounded on a process of repetition. So if there's that knowledge and there's that information in front of you, and you continually expose yourself to it until it becomes something that you can grasp within you, or you can say that it is embedded in your person and be able to make something out of it. So the point there is that there's a necessary element to repetition. And as I was reading this, it's funny how it started with the image of that process of knowledge as a machine-like process, that there is a function, a formula for how things work. We have the information, the data, the outside world or reality, and then it gets inputted through this process, a sort of function, if you will, so that there's this outcome of a particular kind of um, production or a particular kind of machine, which is how the human being or an organism would be considered. Very demystified way of knowledge, and it's it's a simple, almost elegant analysis of how something such as thinking works. And I guess why I wanted to really anchor in on that point is because that simplicity or that elegance is something that is so captivating in a sense that it's really quite hard to look outside of it if you're looking through that kind of formulation. It seems as though it just makes sense. But then the essay continues. Maybe it is truly a simple matter. Be good, do good, live well. Follow some list, some moral code, study well, and go through the systems properly so as to have a good life and be a good person. However, let us try to view this phenomenologically from another perspective. Obey and you will live. From an outsider perspective of someone trying to understand how life works, this kind of function outcome structure may seem enlightening. However, I think it may be just as easy to perceive, if one tries to, how this kind of structure becomes a questionable experience. You are born into this world and immediately you are held against these various systems, the point of which is simply for you to follow it by all means possible. Further, if we try to make that a little more horrifying, the state in which you were born in this world makes you susceptible to having all sorts of difficulties in becoming obedient. Maybe you have a rebellious nature that is always seeking novelty, and yet you must do as old adages do. Adages. Maybe you have particular incapacities, but have been told that it is essential for you to exercise those very capacities you lack, and maybe hide those that you do have but are not considered of quality or necessity. Maybe such structures do not hold as much influence on your psyche and you struggle to feel the need to follow them. There are many other possibilities, but the point is to ask, however the case may be, what should one do if the way to a good life seems next to impossible? I will jump right into another topic, purposefully leaving a gap between that previous thought and the next one for two reasons. One is to establish the point of the next thought, two is to let the thoughts be for later. In parentheses, I say it. I would like to continue to think about them later and not anymore now. I think at that point in writing, I got tired or lazy or both. In any case, the gap may be illusory, and this is more of a makeshift bridge. One might wonder too how such novel things can come up. Those things of innovation, creativity, inspiration, and exercise an unprecedented kind of influence onto human beings or existence. They do not seem to be mere sums of our aforementioned building blocks. They are not simply outputs, but something else. Oftentimes, those human beings from whose practice they come from may not even understand them. Somehow they just happen. Somehow, even a whole society falls in love with an art inexplicably. Paul Ricoeur, in Lectures on Imagination, talks about the concept of framework of references. Knowledge, information, those cognitive existential building blocks are good, but one does not get to create by simply making more of those building blocks. Hence, if a good novel cannot be made by simply copying or recreating a previously considered good one, then how can an existence be good through mere reproduction of a good life? I think the primary condition or context of this reflection on knowledge begins with the individual experience, particularly in in institutional settings. So, say an individual student within the classroom. How can this student learn and become the kind of person that they're supposed to be, they should be, they want to be, given all of these things where it seems as though a lot of the given structures at place go against their very nature. How do you, how can we conceptualize a way of educating such a person when the very means or the very concept of education that we have seems to go against what this individual experiences? But then, as I was reading about it, we can think about how, sure, there are these cases in which, say, a student, an individual, don't get to go through systems or institutions in a normal way, and in that peculiarity comes innovation. So this person who struggles to go through examinations find themselves creating something that becomes innovative and cataclysmic to something beyond themselves. So it creates changes that go beyond themselves. And in such a way, this function outcome structure can't come out come up with that. But then we can probably look at it in an even wider perspective, where a lot of times we're looking at the outside world, reality at large, society, and applying these various functions onto society, saying this is how it is now. These are the various things that must be applied to it in order to create this other thing. And yet, things happen that go against or outside of what anyone can predict or analyze. Maybe even the case that predictions at large don't really seem to work. The things, or more so, that reasons are always applied in retrospect. And so, sure, you can make sense of things after the fact, but as they're happening, a lot of times, a lot of them will look as though it's completely nonsensical. And true causes, true reasons behind particular things can't be determined. That in some period, in some generation, we might perceive things to be this way, and then later finding out that things are another way. And so it would completely change our perception, our understanding of causes and reasons of particular things. So if we have an understanding of knowledge or wisdom in that very simplified or demystified way, I guess maybe the point is that it really isn't as elegant in its simplicity. It's more limiting in that sense. Mm, two things perhaps is the point. One is that I do think the feeling of allure when it comes to elegant and simple explanations, such as that function outcome structure, is very much real, and for probably for a lot of reasons. And sometimes for no reason at all. So it's not really something of a real concern in such a way that that kind of perception has to be completely eradicated. I think that's one of the beauties of human cognition, that it gets to grasp things into these clean systems of thinking, these well crafted thoughts. But at the same time, there's also that notion of not necessarily going beyond it, but seeing that it's probably just one way of looking at things. It's one image, one understanding. In this book by Ricker, there's a section there on painting, and I've always liked how wonderful the model is. I felt it was really easy for me to grasp that whenever someone makes a new painting, say of a flower, they're not just making a painting of that same flower, but they're making a new flower. Say a rose, the painting becomes a new species of the rose. And in that sense, if you perceive every painting, every rendition in that way, then say someone can make 100 paintings of the same rose and they're all going to be different. 100 images of the same thing are never going to be the thing itself, but they're each going to be their own kind, their own species of this thing. And so maybe in a sense, every expression of knowledge, of wisdom, every piece of these building blocks that we have of thought, or even just simply every thought itself, is something that's quite independently its own. Not necessarily that one thought is a lesser form of another thought, but that they're all always different and unique and independent as each individual experience. And maybe then that can be some other way as well of perceiving what it is really that we mean when we say a good life, right? There's that ideal of the good life, and then there are all of these various renditions of it, various images of it, which then carries on with the question. And as I repeat, what should we do if the way to a good life seems next to impossible? When our perception of this ideal of the good life, when this image of the good life seems to be something that's completely against or in contradiction to what we perceive to be the world we live in or ourselves. What then now would that mean if that perception is simply one image amongst many possibilities?